Okay, in a little while, I'd like to sit down and discuss with you the German combat handguns of World War II and my opinion from worst to best of where they rank. However, that doesn't mean you have to agree with it. Remember, any thing you get from me is worth every penny you're paying for it, which is nothing at all. So it's worth every penny. We're not going to discuss the stuff that was found its way on the hips of a German office person or concentration cards. We'll find talk about combat handguns, serious handguns. Is there such a thing as a serious combat handgun? Well, I guess so. But we're not going to talk about the 32s and the 380s or the 9mm Kurtz, if you prefer. I want to talk about the four major handguns that were issued to the German army during the war in 9mm, and just talk a little bit about each one of them. So we'll be back to you with that as soon as we're finished here on the range. All right, as we promised you at the range, we wanted to talk a little bit about the four 9mm service pistols that Germany issued to their troops. I'll start with what I think is the number 4 and work up to the number 1 pistol. Number 4, in my opinion, and my opinion is worth every penny you've paid for it, it was the P08 Luger. Carryover from World War I, rebuilt, repaired, remanufactured, and even new manufactured during the Second World War. And why would do I consider them number 4? Well, first of all, they were very expensive to make, which is the reason that they were replacing them in the first place. They were also, with service ammunition, not very accurate. If you have ever owned a Luger and tried to get accuracy out of it with a service round, you know that's not the best way to go.
Or very reliable either.
Well, then they had reliability problems. And of course that was later replaced. But before we get to its replacement, let's talk to what I think is the number 3 9mm pistol of the German Army, and that would be the Polish Radom, or Viz. Viz stands for power in Latin. And this was used by the Polish Army. And when Germany got to Poland and faced the Polish Army armed with this pistol, they found it was a darn good pistol. Now, if you are a 1911 fan, you will find this right down your alley. If you love the 1911, you'll love the Polish Viz. If you hate the 1911, you'll hate the Polish Viz. It had a few different things. It was a step into the future from what the P08 was, and even the 1911 was, in that it had a couple of features that were much more modern. It was still a single stack, 7-round, 9mm clone of the 1911 in a lot of ways. If the controls are pretty much the same, except that this is a takedown latch, not a safety. It does not have a thumb safety. It has a grip safety only. It has a bushing that is permanently installed. It's press fit, so you didn't have the bushing to remove. It had a full-length rod guide, recoil guide rod. We'll get it here in a minute. And as I said, if you like the 1911, this is almost an absolute clone of it. And the Germans thought enough of it that they kept it in production throughout the war, cheapening it as they went. And one of the reasons it finishes third is that the later models were very, very rough. They weren't heat treated, and they won't last very long. But it shoots well, and it's very reliable. As I said, if you like the 1911, you'll love the Viz. In second place, we would have the P38. P38 was the gun that the Germans put together to replace the P08 Luger, and it was the next step into the modern era of the semi-automatic pistol. It had a double action mechanism, which of course is standard on almost everything these days, to where you could have the hammer down on a loaded chamber and have that long trigger pull, just like a double action revolver, to shoot that first round. Okay, and then after that it would be single action, so you'd have all the nice single action pull. It was an 8-round magazine, so it was only one more round than the Radom and the Luger. But again, it was the next step forward. It might have been 2 steps forward had they made a double stack magazine. But as it was a very reliable, very tough, and reasonably inexpensive to build handgun. And then number 1, as far as I'm concerned, was not a German pistol at all. It was a Browning high power. The Browning high power they ran into in Belgium. They knew about it, of course, before they went there. And once they got their hands on the factory, they produced them throughout the entire war. And the Browning high power was, as most of you will know, the Browning high power was the last pistol designed by John Browning, the same John Browning that designed the 1911 service pistol. And it was in production right through the 80s and into the 90s before they discontinued them. It was the sidearm of not only the Wehrmacht, but it was also the sidearm used by the German police right up into the 80s and 90s. They just put those back on the market in the 90s as surplus. They're very popular, and they served in a lot of other countries as their service pistol. This particular one is not a German pistol. This particular one came out of Italy. It was made in Belgium by Browning, and it has an ambi safety on it, which shows you it's not a war production pistol. And I, of course, don't have any handguns that I have that haven't had some kind of gunsmithing done to them, just because that's what I am. But brought pistols into another dimension with the double stack magazine. I believe the original Browning was 13. Now the current production magazines, most are 15 rounds. I think it was 14. It had a magazine safety, and what that meant was that with the gun cocked, if an officer had his gun being taken away from him, all he had to do is hit the button. And the magazine disconnect safety meant he couldn't be shot with his own gun unless the guy understood that it won't function until you put this in. This one has had the magazine safety removed. It's not something that I'm very crazy about, and I think it's just excess parts to have something to go wrong, but that's my opinion. They're generally an $800 or $900 gun if you can find one in good shape. Occasionally things will happen, like, as I said, this one came in from Italy. This came out of the Italian prison system. The wardens were armed with the high power, and it was a gun that was sitting in their armory, and they sold it off as surplus. When I got it, it didn't have a magazine, and it didn't have grips, and it didn't have the safety lever on the right hand side. They had stripped those parts off of it for other guns. So, and it had a big scar on it. I polished it, reblued it, did some fancy work on it because I could. And I bought it for $350 online. So for an $800 gun, that's a heck of a deal. I've had to buy 2 magazines for it, buy grips for it, and a safety lever. And since then, it has never had a hiccup. I can understand why everybody, the Germans as well as so many other foreign militaries, loved it. It is reliable. It's a John Browning design, and boy, I'll tell you, you just can't go wrong with a Browning high power. This one has hoe grips and some aftermarket magazines that will still fall free if you want to use them use it as a game gun. It's just a superb piece of machinery. The Germans realized it. They put it into their system, their supply system, and it was the premier semi-automatic pistol of World War II, unless you take into consideration John Browning's other design, the 1911. This was an improvement on the 1911, but this has had a lot of newer generation parts. They were the double stack magazine, 15 rounds instead of 7. The trigger was probably not as easy to get a great trigger pull on, but it wasn't a target gun. It was made as a combat weapon. And if you get a US 1911 that had been issued, it wasn't a target gun either. So it was a 9mm and gave you, I think it was originally 11 or 14 rounds, something like that. But it certainly gave you a lot more ammunition to play with or save your life with than any of the other pistols. That leads us to the question of, is any pistol really a combat effective weapon? Well, it's better than not having a pistol. and proof of that is, of course, even the United States government was trying to replace the 1911 when they came out with the M1 Carbine. That was for troops that were not in frontline positions, that they could actually be able to hit something if they had to. And something handy to carry. But of course it never replaced the pistol, and as soon as the infantrymen saw it, they decided they'd rather carry a carbine than a Grand. They wanted to carry a carbine but shoot a Grand. You're going to carry a rifle all day, give me a 6-pound rifle instead of an 8-pound rifle. But once you got into the towns in Europe that most of the construction was stone, the carbine didn't have much penetrating power, so right away everybody wanted an M1 Grand. So you carry a carbine, you shoot a Grand. This is the old Singing Gunsmith saying, happy trails.